Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The birthday cake had 38 candles on it, which meant my mother had been alive long enough to watch me be humiliated at her own celebration. My sister Danielle set the cake down with the careful satisfaction of someone who had done everything right. She'd booked the restaurant. She'd organized the guest list. She'd even had the cake custom lettered in the bakery 2 blocks from the house she and her husband Marcus owned outright, a 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester that they mentioned with the casual frequency of people who needed you to know. I'd arrived with a gift-wrapped box containing a cashmere travel blanket in my mother's favorite color, dusty rose. Danielle had glanced at it briefly when I set it on the gift table and said nothing, which was its own kind of commentary. There were 14 people at the table. My parents, Danielle and Marcus, my aunt and uncle from Connecticut, 3 of my mother's friends from her book club, 2 couples my parents had known since before I was born, my cousin Priya, who had driven up from the city and was the only person at the table who had texted me beforehand to ask if I needed anything. I didn't need anything. That was the part they didn't understand. I'd ordered the salmon, poured myself a glass of water, and settled in for what I had learned over many years to treat as theater. My family performed a version of me at these gatherings, the younger daughter, the one who dabbled, the one who hadn't figured it out yet. I'd been waiting for the right moment to change the script. I didn't know it was happening tonight. My name is Claire Ashford, and for most of my adult life, I have been very deliberately invisible. Not invisible the way shy people are invisible, or invisible the way unsuccessful people learn to make themselves small. Invisible the way you choose to be when you've realized that visibility in certain environments costs more than it returns. I grew up the second daughter of Richard and Patricia Ashford in a comfortable suburb north of the city where the metric for success was legibility. You became a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher. You got the job title people could explain at dinner parties. You earned a salary that came with healthcare and a 401k and the particular dignity of being able to answer, "What do you do?" without watching the other person's face rearrange itself. Danielle had done it perfectly. By 32, she was a senior marketing director at a pharmaceutical company, married to Marcus Chen, who was a corporate attorney with a firm whose name had 4 surnames in it. They had the house. They had the 2 cars. They had the lab named Biscuit who appeared in their Christmas cards with a tartan bandana. I had, by all visible evidence, none of this. What I had instead was a story that started, unremarkably, in the bedroom of my apartment in Hoboken, at age 24, with a laptop and a problem. The problem was that I was bored. I'd done the expected thing first. Graduated with a business degree, taken a position at a mid-size retail company in their supply chain division, learned the machinery of how products moved from manufacturers to distributors to shelves to customers. I was good at it. My manager told me I had instincts. But the work was slow, and the ceiling was visible from where I stood, and one night I started running numbers on a different model and couldn't stop. E-commerce had been growing for years, but I wasn't interested in running an online store. What interested me was the infrastructure underneath, the supplier networks, the fulfillment chains, the gap between what products cost to manufacture and what the market would bear for them. I'd spent 2 years inside a company watching those gaps from the outside. I wanted to know if I could operate inside them. I started small. A dropshipping operation selling specialty home goods, minimalist organizers, high thread count bedding, kitchen accessories with clean design. Nothing revolutionary. I sourced from a mid-sized manufacturing firm based in North Carolina called Meridian Goods and used them as my primary supplier. The margins were solid. The products were good. The operation was simple enough to run from a laptop in the evenings after work. My family found out about it at Thanksgiving of that year, and their reaction was immediate and unanimous. Dropshipping, my father repeated, with the tone of someone who'd been told I'd taken up amateur taxidermy. Isn't that what teenagers do? Danielle had laughed, not cruelly, not yet, just reflexively, the way you laugh at something that doesn't compute. You're dropshipping. Like, you're a middleman with a website? Essentially, I said. Claire. Dad had set down his fork. You have a real job. You have a career path. Why are you doing this? I tried to explain that it wasn't a hobby, that the numbers were good, that I was learning things I couldn't learn anywhere else. They listened politely and changed the subject to Danielle's promotion. That was 6 years ago. What happened in those 6 years was not visible to my family because I chose not to make it visible. But here is what actually happened. Within 18 months, my dropshipping revenue had cleared $400,000. I quit my supply chain job quietly, told my family I'd taken a remote consulting position, which was technically true in the same way that saying a river moves water is technically true. I hired a small team. I expanded the product lines. I began to understand Meridian Goods, my supplier, from the inside out. Meridian was run by a man named Gerald Holt, 63, a third-generation manufacturer who was exceptional at making things and increasingly exhausted by selling them. He'd built the company to $80 million in annual revenue and then watched the logistics landscape shift beneath him without the capital or appetite to chase it. When I started ordering volume, he noticed. When I asked for a meeting, he agreed. We talked for 4 hours. Gerald was smart and tired in equal measure. He had a daughter who had no interest in manufacturing and a son who was living in Portland and making pottery. He needed a succession path. He needed capital. He needed someone who understood his business and cared enough to protect it. I was 30 years old when I acquired a controlling stake in Meridian Goods for $14.2 million, a figure that would have caused my father to need to sit down if he'd known about it. Gerald stayed on as chairman. I restructured the operations, expanded the supplier network, and renamed the parent entity under which we operated. I named it Elara Industries. The name came from a moon of Jupiter, small, quiet, orbiting something larger without anyone noticing it much. That had felt appropriate. Over the following 3 years, Elara grew. I made 3 additional acquisitions: a textile manufacturer in Georgia, a logistics software company in Ohio, a packaging firm outside of Dallas. I brought in a CEO to run day-to-day operations and kept my own role quiet, titleless. The kind of presence on an org chart that only shows up in the ownership documents. By the time I walked into my mother's birthday dinner that evening, Elara Industries had revenues of $340 million annually and was carrying a valuation conversation with a private equity consortium that had been circling for 8 months. I still described myself to my family as running a little online store. It was easier, and I'd wanted, for reasons I would have struggled to articulate cleanly, to see how long the story they'd already written for me would hold. I was about to find out it couldn't hold past dessert. The thing about building something real is that it doesn't announce itself. There's no moment where you cross a threshold and a notification appears. You have succeeded. There's just more work, different work, problems that get larger as the operation gets larger, and a growing gap between what you know to be true and what the people who love you have decided to believe. I kept my Hoboken apartment for 2 years after I could have afforded to leave it, partly because it was practical, low overhead, no performance of success, and partly because changing too much too fast would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give. When I finally moved, I bought a 2-bedroom in Tribeca, cash transaction, registered under a trust. I told my parents I'd found a nice rental. My operational partner during this period was a woman named Sonia Vega. Sonia had been Gerald Holt's CFO at Meridian and had agreed to stay when I took over, initially with the caution of someone waiting to see if I knew what I was doing. Within 6 months, she decided I did, and after that she was fully in. Sonia was the only person who knew the full picture, the only person I'd chosen to know it. She understood, without my having to explain it extensively, the particular social tax of being underestimated by the people you came from. She'd grown up the daughter of a seamstress in Albuquerque and had her own catalog of dinner parties where someone had looked at her and decided the story before she spoke. "You know you're going to have to tell them eventually," she said once, on a Thursday afternoon in the offices we kept in a building in Midtown that my family had never visited and didn't know existed. "Tell them what? What this is." She gestured at the room, the glass partition wall, the operations floor beyond it, the 18 people who worked there full-time. "I'll tell them when there's nothing they can do with the information," I said. Sonia had looked at me for a moment. That's not the same as being ready. She wasn't wrong. But I'd kept the boundary anyway because I'd learned, over years of family dinners and holiday gatherings, that visibility in my family operated as currency, and currency in my family had always flowed toward Danielle. Not from cruelty. This was the part one had to keep reminding myself of, but from pattern. Danielle was the eldest. She'd done everything first. She'd given them the template for what success looked like, and I'd come after and refused to match the template, and the gap between their expectations and my reality had widened so gradually that none of us had named it. My father, Richard Ashford, had worked for 30 years as a branch manager at a regional bank. He understood institutional structures, salary bands, the language of career ladders with visible rungs. What he didn't have a framework for was ownership, the kind where you didn't ask permission, didn't report to anyone, didn't receive a W-2 at the end of the year. When I tried to explain it early on, his eyes had found the middle distance in the way that meant the concept wasn't landing, and I'd stopped trying. My mother was softer about it, which was almost worse. Patricia Ashford worried about me in the particular register of mothers who love their children completely and understand them partially. She'd clip articles about small business tax complications. She'd forward emails about healthcare coverage for freelancers. She'd ask, with genuine care, whether I had enough saved for when the website thing slowed down. I had $47 million in liquid assets at the time of the most recent forwarded email. I'd replied, "Thanks, Mom. I'm careful with it." The acquisition conversation with the private equity firm, a group called Kensington Partners out of Boston, had been moving for 8 months by the time of my mother's birthday. The valuation they were working toward was $2.8 billion for the full entity. My stake, at 63% post-dilution, would net me approximately $1.76 billion at close. The deal had gone into final documentation 3 weeks earlier. The public announcement had been scheduled for the following week. I had not planned for it to arrive early. I had not planned for Marcus Chun, my sister's husband, to be subscribed to a financial news alert service that pinged his phone with M&A announcements in real time. I had not planned for any of this to happen over birthday cake. But I also wasn't sorry it did. The comment that broke the evening open didn't start with Danielle. It started, as these things often do, with momentum. We'd gotten through the appetizers without incident. My mother had cried a little when she opened the cashmere blanket, which made it worth bringing. My father had told a long story about a golf game that had gone sideways in a way he found funnier than anyone else did. My aunt from Connecticut had asked if I was seeing anyone, and I'd said no, and the subject had been changed with the speed of people who decided that topic was a gentle wound. It was when the main course arrived that Marcus started talking about a deal his firm had worked on, something in the logistics space, a mid-size acquisition, nothing he could detail specifically. Danielle lit up the way she always did when Marcus talked about work, with a particular expression that managed to both celebrate him and define herself by proximity. "Corporate work is just a different level," she said, not to anyone in particular. "The complexity, the scale. It's not like running a little online store." The phrase landed as it was meant to. She glanced at me briefly, not with cruelty, exactly, but with the certainty of someone who knows the hierarchy. I said nothing. I reached for my water. "Claire," my father said, with the tone he used when he was about to offer guidance he'd already offered many times. "We've never really pushed back on the store thing because we know it makes you happy. But Marcus is right." "I didn't say anything," Marcus said. "The world has structure. Salaries exist for a reason. Stability exists for a reason." "I'm stable," I said. "You're dropshipping," Danielle said, louder than she needed to, loud enough that the book club women 2 seats down went briefly quiet. "Can you please stop telling people you run a business? It's dropshipping. It's embarrassing." She set her fork down. "Marcus's colleagues were asking about you at the last firm dinner, and I didn't know what to say." "You could have said I run a business," I said. "You resell products you don't manufacture from a website you didn't build to customers you've never met." Her voice had the sharp precision of someone who'd rehearsed this at least once. "That's not a business. That's a hobby with a Shopify account." My father actually slow-clapped. A single deliberate clap, then a second. "She's right. Get a salary. Get benefits. You're 30 years old." My mother made a sound that was trying to be diplomatic and missed. My cousin Priya, 3 seats down, had gone very still. I nodded quietly and sipped my water. And that was the moment, though none of them saw it, where I decided I was finished letting this particular story run. Not out of anger, not to prove something, but because there is a specific, quiet exhaustion in being misread by people who love you, and I'd been carrying it for 6 years, and I was tired, and the cake hadn't even come out yet. Marcus's phone buzzed. I want to be accurate about what I felt in the seconds between Marcus picking up his phone and his expression changing. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not revenge. Revenge implies the other person is an enemy, and my family was not my enemy. They were people who had written a story about me using the information available to them, and I had given them very little information, and so the story they'd written was wrong, and that was partly my doing. I knew that. What I felt was closer to the particular clarity that arrives when something you've been waiting for without admitting it suddenly arrives. I had known in the abstract that the Kensington deal would go public. I had known that when it did, there would be no more managing the narrative. I had known that my family would eventually encounter, through some channel or another, the gap between the story and the truth. I had not staged this. I want to be precise about that. I had not tipped off a journalist. I had not coordinated with Sonia. I had not done anything except arrive at a birthday dinner with a cashmere blanket and sit quietly while my family explained me to myself. The announcement going out early was Kensington's doing. Their PR team had pushed the release by 6 days to get ahead of a leak that had been circulating in financial media circles. I found this out later from Sonia, who had texted me at 7:42 p.m. Heads up, announcement just dropped. You okay? I had read her text under the table, nodded once to myself, and set the phone face down. Marcus picked up his phone. What I was thinking about in those seconds was not my sister. It was Gerald Holt. It was the afternoon 3 years ago when Gerald had called me after the acquisition closed and said, very quietly, that he was glad it was me. That he'd worried, after he'd started getting acquisition interest, that Meridian would end up owned by people who saw it as a portfolio line item. That when I'd walked into his conference room for the first time, he'd known within an hour that I understood what had been built there. I was thinking about that because Gerald was the reason any of this existed. Not me alone. Gerald's 30 years of unglamorous excellence were the foundation I'd built on. That mattered, and it was not a story my family would ever fully understand, and that was a loss I'd made a kind of peace with. I was also thinking about Priya, who had known something was coming, who had sent me the text that afternoon that said only, "However tonight goes, proud of you." Marcus read the alert twice. Then he looked up. Wait. Marcus said it the way people say it when they're trying to buy time for their brain to catch up. He was staring at his phone. His brow had done something complicated. Elara Industries just acquired, he stopped. Read it again. Elara Industries just completed a $2.8 billion acquisition deal. He turned the phone over in his hand, then placed it flat on the table. Who is Elara Industries? The question was addressed to no one specifically, which was how I knew he already suspected the answer. Tech firm? My father offered, reaching for the bread. Manufacturing and logistics, Marcus said. His voice had gone careful. The voice of a corporate attorney who has learned to slow down when something doesn't add up. The parent company that owns Meridian Goods, which is, he stopped again. Set down his knife. Claire. The table had not gone silent yet. That was still a few seconds away. Yes, I said. Meridian Goods. He said it slowly. That's the company you source from. For your, he paused, and in the pause I could see him reassessing every assumption in real time. For your store. One of the companies I source from, I said. Yes. Elara Industries just announced a $2.8 billion acquisition. He was watching me with the focused intensity of someone in a deposition. Of the firm that is your primary supplier. And you, he picked up his phone again, scrolled, then held it up. The press release was brief and efficient. Kensington Partners completes acquisition of Elara Industries. Elara Industries, founded in 2019, operates a portfolio of manufacturing and logistics businesses across 5 states. Founder Claire Ashford will continue in an advisory role. He read the last sentence aloud. Founder Claire Ashford. The table went silent. My father had the bread halfway to his plate. My mother had both hands around her wine glass without drinking from it. Danielle's expression had passed through several phases, Confusion, computation, something that wasn't quite disbelief, because disbelief requires the thing to be impossible, and this wasn't impossible. It was just information she hadn't had. Claire. My father set the bread down. Is that you? Yes, I said. You founded. I founded Alara Industries in 2019 when I acquired a controlling stake in Meridian Goods. Over the past 4 years, I made 3 additional acquisitions and grew the entity to roughly $340 million in annual revenue. Kensington Partners has been in acquisition discussions for 8 months. The deal finalized last week. The announcement was supposed to go out next Wednesday, but their PR team moved the timeline. I said this in the same voice I used to discuss salmon preferences. Even, measured, unremarkable. No one spoke. I don't, my mother started. Stopped. You own a manufacturing company. A manufacturing and logistics holding company. Worth. The acquisition valued Alara at $2.8 billion. My stake was 63%, post-dilution. My aunt from Connecticut put her hand over her mouth. My father pushed back from the table slightly, the way people do when they need physical distance from information. For how long? The first acquisition was 2019. So 5 years. 5 years. He repeated it with the tone of someone converting units. You've owned a billion-dollar company for 5 years. It wasn't $1 billion in 2019. It grew. Danielle had said nothing. This was notable because Danielle almost never said nothing. She was sitting very still with her fork beside her plate and her face doing something I hadn't seen it do before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something more disorienting than both. The expression of someone watching a room rearrange itself around a fact they cannot dispute. Marcus, to his credit, was the first to recover. He was an attorney. Professional recalibration was a practice skill. The dropshipping store, he said. That was the retail operation built on Meridian's product lines. It was how I initially understood the market and the supplier relationship. When I saw the gap in Meridian's ownership structure, I pursued it. You used the store to learn the supplier. Essentially. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man recalculating 6 years of dinner party conversations. Claire. Danielle's voice came out lower than usual. Why didn't you say anything? I looked at her. I thought about how to answer this honestly, because she deserved honesty, and because I didn't want to wound her more than the truth already would. At first, I said, it was practical. In a competitive acquisition environment, you don't talk about your positions. Any signal that I had capital behind me would have changed my negotiating leverage. And after that it was simpler. Every time I came to a family dinner, I was already written. You already knew who I was, what I was doing, what it was worth. And I was tired, I said, of explaining, of the conversation that would come after explaining, of the way it would shift things between us in ways I couldn't predict. I paused. I wasn't hiding. I was watching. Danielle blinked. Watching what? My father said. Whether anything would change on its own. I kept my voice even. It didn't. But that wasn't a failure on anyone's part. It just became clear, eventually, that the story had been finished without me and the ending had been decided. My cousin Priya, who had been completely silent, reached under the table and found my hand and squeezed it once. I didn't look at her. I want to be clear about something, I said, and my voice came out slightly different now, not harder, but more precise, the way your vision sharpens when you stop pretending not to see something. I'm not angry. I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone. The timing tonight was not my choice. I glanced at Marcus's phone on the table. But I've been called a hobbyist and a burden and a cautionary tale at this table for 6 years, and I think that deserves to be addressed with accurate information. Dropshipping, Danielle said. The word came out quiet and deflated. The retail storefront was real. It still runs. It cleared $6.2 million in revenue last quarter through Meridian's product lines. It was also the least interesting part of what I built. I tilted my head slightly. But yes, it's technically dropshipping. My father exhaled. It was a long exhale. The exhale of a man dismantling something he'd held in place for years. I owe you an apology, he said. Not smoothly, not easily. The words came out rough and genuine. You were working with the information you had, I said. I gave you very little. That's generous. It's accurate. I paused. The apology is still appreciated. My mother had started crying, which I'd expected. She wasn't crying from guilt or shame, or not only from that. She was crying the way mothers cry when they understand that their child was carrying something alone and chose not to bring it to them, and the loss in that is real regardless of who made it true. I'm all right, Mom, I said. I know you are, she said. That's what I'm crying about. Danielle still hadn't moved. I watched her for a moment. She was looking at the table, at some neutral middle point between her plate and Marcus's phone. Danielle, I said. She looked up. I don't need you to understand why I didn't tell you. I know you think you were protecting something, the family's sense of what was possible, what success looked like. I know the embarrassment was real for you, not performed. I held her gaze. But I need you to know that every time you described my work as nothing at this table, it cost something, even when I looked like it didn't. She didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was uncharacteristically small. I didn't know. You chose not to investigate, I said. That's different. The cake arrived. No one had remembered to stop the waiter. The rest of the dinner was quiet in the way that spaces are quiet after something structural has shifted, not empty, but loaded, full of things that hadn't been said yet and weren't going to be said tonight. My mother pulled herself together with the practical grace she'd always had. She cut the cake. She served it. She asked my aunt about her drive from Connecticut. The motion of normalcy was deliberate and kind, and I appreciated it even as I recognized what it was, the thing families do when the truth has arrived and no one is ready to sit with it fully yet. Marcus spoke to me quietly while the others were distracted with dessert plates. He was the kind of man who processed efficiently, who would feel the full weight of the evening later, alone, but in the immediate moment could function in professional mode. The Kensington deal, he said. That closes when? 90 days. He nodded. Advisory role, that's post-acquisition? I'll stay on for 18 months. Transition and oversight. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that was almost respect, still complicated by everything that surrounded it. You built something significant. I built something I cared about, I said. They're related, but they're not the same thing.
He processed that.
Fair. My father found me near the coat check at the end of the evening. He'd aged, I thought, in the 2 hours since the announcement, not dramatically, but in the way that rapid recalibration ages people, the small visible work of holding an old picture up against new light and finding it doesn't match. I've been thinking, he said, about all the times I told you to be more careful, more practical. I was being practical, I said, just in a different direction. I know that now. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't see it. You saw what I let you see. I shouldn't have needed to be given a reason to believe in you. That landed. I let it land. No, I said. You shouldn't have. He nodded once, the nod of a man who isn't going to make excuses.
I respected him for that.
My father had many limitations, but dishonesty in moments of reckoning wasn't one of them. Danielle, and I didn't speak again that night. She helped my mother with her coat and said her goodbyes and moved through the end of the evening with the careful composure of someone who is not going to process the evening in public. I knew her well enough to know she'd call me eventually. I didn't know what I would say when she did. Priya walked out with me and didn't say anything until we reached the sidewalk, and then she said, "You know you're going to need a new apartment." "I have a new apartment," I said. She stopped. "How long?" 3 years. She stared at me. Then she laughed, genuinely, delightedly, and the sound of it on the nighttime street was the best thing I'd heard all evening. 3 months after my mother's birthday dinner, the Kensington acquisition closed. The wire transfer confirmation arrived on a Tuesday morning. Sonia called at 8:17 a.m. She didn't say anything for a moment after I answered, and then she said, "We did it," and I sat with that for a second because the "we" was the truest thing about it. Gerald Holt sent a handwritten note on actual paper, in the slightly formal cursive of a man from a generation that still used stationery. It said, "You took care of what I built. Thank you for that." I framed it. Not the wire confirmation. The note. The thing about arriving at the outcome you'd been working toward is that it doesn't feel the way the work did. The work had texture, problems, friction, the specific satisfaction of solving something that resisted solving. The outcome felt clean and strange, the way a room feels after you've moved all the furniture. I bought my parents a trip to Portugal. Not as a gesture of triumph. I want to be precise about this. But because my mother had mentioned it at 3 separate dinners over the past 4 years, and they never had the occasion to plan it. I texted my father the itinerary, and he called me within 4 minutes. There was a long pause on the phone before he said anything. You didn't have to, he said. I know, I said. He cleared his throat. I'm proud of you, Claire. I know that too, I said. It just took a while to get the information. He laughed at that. The quiet, slightly pained laugh of a man who knows he's being let off gently and is grateful for it. Danielle called 2 weeks after the dinner. I'd expected it. She didn't apologize immediately, which I also expected. That's not how Danielle processes. She asked questions first, practical ones, about the structure of Alara, about when I'd known, about what Gerald Holt was like. She was building a revised picture before she could say what she felt about it, which is very much who she has always been. At the end of the call, she said, I called it embarrassing. You did. In front of people. You did. I'm sorry for that. She said it clearly, without softening it into a different shape. Not for being wrong about what you'd built. I didn't have that information. For the contempt. That was mine. I held the phone for a moment. I know you wanted the best for the family, I said. I know the way you express it and the way I experience it have never been the same thing. That's diplomatic. It's also true. There was a pause. Not unfriendly. The pause of 2 people measuring a new distance between them. So what now, she said. We figure out what it looks like from here, I said. I don't know yet. Okay, she said. And then, after a moment, the cashmere blanket was really nice, by the way. Mom won't stop talking about it. I smiled. Not at the victory. At the smallness of that, the blanket, the birthday, the ordinary human fact that we were still, after everything, the daughters of Patricia Ashford, and that meant something, still and always would. Not everything was resolved, but something had been returned to the truth, and I was going to let that be enough. For now, that was enough.